Well, here are the bare facts. Max Verstappen, Red Bull, no mistakes. Well, a couple of extra track limit dramas that he didn't quite need. We'll get onto that a little bit further into the video. But everything else was perfect. They took the conservative option to start Max on medium tyres just to get him through a long first stint, knowing they had the pace. Of course, that was always going to be a little bit iffy off the line, particularly as Ferrari are always very, very good off the start, and so it proved. Max made a good start, but Carlos Sainz alongside him on the outside, crowding him as he went into the braking area into turn one. But Max just stuck to it, and in the end, Carlos had to back away and give position to Max. And after that, it was turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, and by turn 9, turn 10, he was already 3 or 4 car lengths ahead. Game over, race over, that was it. Max Verstappen in a class of his own, Red Bull managing the race according to how quickly they needed to go at any given moment based on where the opposition was, using the tyre strategy that they'd set out to use, very conservative, and won the race with ease. No issues at all. I predicted yesterday that if Max did have a problem, the win could go to Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. Well, I guess that is the big story. He got completely and utterly blown away by the two Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. Lewis really, really good throughout the race. Got very lucky to get out of turn 2 in one piece. Lando Norris hit him, avoiding the general skirmish there, but Lando ran into the back of Lewis. Lucky not to have punctured a tyre, damaged the McLaren. That was basically the end of Lando's race. He did continue, but had to come in for a new nose, etc., etc. End of story. But Lewis kept going, and really, really good drive by Lewis. Very, very good drive too by George Russell. Seems to be absolutely no animosity at all between those two in the way they behaved after the race. Two drivers in complete harmony with one another. Two good buddies. Lewis very happy for George. I wonder if that's what he really feels inside. We'll see as the season progresses. But Mercedes showing real and genuine pace, blew not only Ferrari away, but also Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso had a very, very disappointing day. And Mercedes can only come away from this race thinking, yes, we are on the right path now. As I've said a couple of times on live streams recently, look for certainly Mercedes, if not possibly Aston Martin, to be winning some races towards the end of the year, only because, well, partly because they'll be making progress, inevitably, and partly because Red Bull, if they get into a position where they are impregnable, which probably they will be by mid-season, if not now, will start to back away from spending too much money and budget and time and effort on this year's car, and will focus on the 2024 car, as a result of which, of course, it will draw the opposition nearer. So it might be a little bit false, as it was towards the end of last year, when, of course, Mercedes won in Brazil. Not very good in Abu Dhabi 2 weeks later, interestingly. But Red Bull backing away back end of last year, putting a bit of weight on the car just to keep it reliable. It was nothing like as quick as it could have been had they been under real pressure. And I think it'll be the same story in 2023. But that's for further down the road. As for today, Max just superb. Back to being the Max Verstappen. It was dry. There was some ominous storm clouds. George Russell at one point thought he felt a few drops of rain, but then changed his description. All good stuff from George. I mean, this is great radio commentary, and decided it was sweat in the eye instead of rain. Sweat inside the helmet, actually, which he confused with rain. Reminds me of the Tim Schenken book of excuses, which everybody used to read whenever there was a shunt, to sort of come up with one. And I think it was Francois Sever had a shunt in the Tyrrell in 72 and blamed sweat in the eye for that one and got away with it. I think Ken said, yeah, okay, all right, try not to let it happen again, Francois. So it's the first time I can remember a driver talking about sweat being an issue at all. It wasn't an issue for George, it was just something to talk about, I guess. And later in the race, we had all of the 4 top runners, that's the 2 Red Bulls sandwiching the 2 Mercedes, all on soft tyres. Admittedly, a little bit of difference in mileage, but quite interesting there, because Max was doing sort of low 17s and Lewis was responding with mid to high 17s. So that would be, if you wanted to litmus test right now the gap between Red Bull and Mercedes, it's about that. But then let's get onto this track limits thing, because by then Max had a black and white flag, a warning flag, because I think it was 3 times now he had track limits on different corners. And every time the radio message came through, it was, well, what corner? Why? And they're all quiet. And then they said, well, Max, you've had the black and white. No more of that. Just stay on track. Don't take any risks at all. And about 3 minutes later, Max said, who's got fastest lap at the moment? They said, well, but you don't need to do it, Max, because you've had this strike already. You're right on the edge. You had the black and white flag. So just bring it home, bring it home. And the following lap, he did a 16.3, set fastest lap. Bearing in mind he'd been doing 17s and 18s, suddenly did a 16.3. And interestingly, Lewis then went for fastest lap and did a 16.6. So all credit to Lewis for going for it. On soft tyres at that stage of the race, Max possibly leaving a little bit of margin because of the black and white flag, 0.3 between them. So you could come away from this, if you were Mercedes, and say, wow, we've really made some progress. And at this point, I think we all have to say chapeau to Mercedes, because they have made steps in the right direction and they brought both cars home and they look really good. You can see there the strategies: Red Bull, medium, hard, soft. And you can understand that from Max's point of view. If we can run the same pace, lead the race and pull away on the medium, we've kind of done the job, with everybody inevitably starting on the soft. And that's exactly what happened. The hard, long stint for Max was when he was using that track limits thing. The car was sliding quite a lot. And that explains why Charles Leclerc couldn't really get on top of the hards that he started on from the pit lane. The strategy at Ferrari obviously was to run a mega long stint. But Charles had to come in after only 16 laps because the hard on the Ferrari was so bad, and switch to a set of softs and then go back to the hard. And it was the kind of opposite for Charles to how Max used the hard tyre in Miami when it was really good with the heavy fuel load, but the Ferrari just destroyed the hard tyre. So for Charles, it was a very, very hard day at the office, HSH. Mercedes, like everybody else really, started on the soft tyre, went to the medium, and then back to the soft. There was a point about 2/3 of the way through the first stint on softs when George was getting on the radio saying, this car feels great, the tyres are not going away, and Lewis was saying the same thing. And can we possibly run a one-stop strategy? Can we run this stint any longer? In the end, Mercedes did the right thing and brought them in at about the right moment on the outer extremity of the window of the soft tyre, put them on the medium and then back on the soft at the end of the race, which was a great strategy. Carlos Sainz started on the soft also in the Ferrari, made that very good run into the first corner, and then began to drop away fairly comprehensively, and then never really looked as if he was going to be a contender thereafter, even if Max had a problem. And he came in 10 laps earlier than the two Mercedes drivers for his set of mediums. I think that is also a very significant snapshot of where Mercedes are now and where Ferrari continue to be, which is not very good on tyre management and not looking very good on a day when potentially they could have taken P2 in this Grand Prix. But Carlos Sainz, I'm not sure we can hold that against Carlos, because Charles had a terrible weekend as well. And then there was Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso, not great in qualifying. He was obviously going to start on the soft, and they put him on. He wasn't very good in that first stint, and then they put him on softs again to see if they could lift him in the middle phase of the race when everybody was going to mediums. That didn't really work either, and then eventually he finished the race on hards, and he got beaten by his teammate Lance Stroll. Towards the end of the race, Fernando did his usual thing, bit anxious, got on the radio saying, tell Lance not to worry, I'm not going to put any pressure on him, it's just that I want to make sure I've got enough cushion to everyone behind me in case it gets wet or something like that. It was just another Fernando saying, I think Lance is wonderful and Stroll's brilliant, and isn't Aston Martin the team of the future? If you think back to Felipe Massa and the trouble he had with Fernando when they're at Ferrari, maybe Fernando's changed. Maybe that's just the real Fernando. Yeah, right. But you got to give him full marks for being a race driver, and we all love Fernando for that. So, yeah, a disappointing day for Aston Martin. There was a time early on when Lance Stroll was looking very good. He took P3 from Lewis Hamilton around the outside of turn 4 and got the braking into turn 5, the hairpin. Wow. Very impressive to do that to Lewis. But then he quite quickly faded. About 4 laps later, Lewis got him. And at that point, even on full tanks, it was pretty clear that the Mercedes was a better race car over the full race distance and the way it was going to use its tyres than the Aston Martin. So this was a quantum shift as well, because this should have been a pretty good circuit for Aston. Very good aero efficiency, good all-round performance, drivable car, good in terms of tyre management. The drivers need to play around a bit, but Mercedes had them all day, and it was quite impressive to see that. That was one of the other points, I think, around which we can gauge the progress that Mercedes have made. And if you look at all those different colours on the strategies, the reason I think it's like that is because this was a relatively hard set of compounds that Pirelli bought. And so you could argue it was kind of much of a muchness where you were going to go with the tyres. It wasn't going to make that much difference. You just made the call based on where you were on the grid and how you were doing in the race at any given moment. And when the compound range is a softer compound range, well, then everybody kind of gravitates to the only raceable strategy. Okay, so Spanish Grand Prix, another resounding win for Max Verstappen and Red Bull. When he needed to in qualifying, he drove slightly differently. And that's one of the great things about being a touch and feel driver like Max, a manipulative driver rather than a driver who's constantly reacting to what the car's doing. Thanks for watching. Thanks to our two partners, Jetcraft and to Pitbox.io. Read about them in the description below this video. Take care.